Welcome to this discussion on bold leadership, uniting behind the South Africa that we want. This is brought to you by the Mentorship Boardroom, and we're coming to you from the Nelson Mandela Foundation in Johannesburg, South Africa. It's my pleasure to introduce you to my esteemed panel this evening, starting with Mr. Kuseni Dlamini, who is the chairperson of both Aspen and Massmart. Thank you, Kuseni, for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yolanda Kuba, who is the founder of the Mentorship Boardroom and Vice President, MTN Group. Tumi Sole, who is the founder of #Country Duty. He's a well-known social activist in South Africa. Mpumi Zikalala, Kumba Iron Ore CEO. And we're also joined by Advocate Tembeka Nuku Ayatobi. Nuba Ayatobi. Do you know how much I have been practicing that?
That's probably all right.
Give it to me. Do you know, I must say, just to start this off on a lighter note, I was at London Business School, and the minister from Rwanda, Sorea Hakuzi-Yaremye. All right, so you've got nothing on Hakuzi-Yaremye. So by the end of it, I'll definitely Ngugu.
It's certainly not Hakuzi Yaremre, but yeah, it's Nukai Tobi actually. It's just one click.
Nukai Tobi.
Yeah,
okay, there we go. We said as fast as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And let's kick off on the bold leadership elements. So I think the first thing is really to understand from each of you what bold leadership actually means. Kuseni, I'm looking at you.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. It's a great pleasure to be here. We're living in very challenging times, locally and regionally as well as globally. The case for bold leadership cannot be overemphasized. It's required today than ever before. What does it mean? It really means leaders that have got the courage of their convictions to analyze the conjuncture of economic and political and social forces that is at play and be able to take the hard decisions that need to be taken. Leadership is about taking people to places that they could not imagine. And Madiba was a great example when he actually challenged. It's great that we are here at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, when he challenged his own movement, his own comrades around issues such as the armed struggle and the issues around the mixed economy and issues around nationalization. When he went to Davos and made a statement around South Africa pivoting towards a mixed economy, there's a lot of criticism because the struggle has always been about having a socialist economic system, and the forces that were at play at the time were all very much aligned to the socialist agenda. As we all know that we were supported by the likes of Russia and China in getting our liberation. So in this current context, we've got pressing issues such as the energy crisis that we face. We've got a water crisis. We've got an unemployment crisis, a growth crisis. Bold leadership now really means looking at how do we reset the economy? How do we make sure that we take all the decisive measures to really drive an agenda that will create decent jobs, especially for the young unemployed people of South Africa. We heard about young unemployed graduates earlier on from Yolanda, but there's a bigger unemployment question out there. I dare even say an unemployment pandemic that we have. And we need almost a state of disaster of sorts, as we did have to deal with COVID, to be able to deal with unemployment. We are seeing the issues around security.
So there are so many different elements that we're going to touch on tonight, but I want to just go around the room quickly and get this element of bold leadership. So Yolanda Kuba, I say to you, bold leadership, you say?
Bronwyn, I would say it's about courage first, right? It's about courage to make decisions and then take action, right? I mean, I think there's been many times where we've made decisions but have not followed it up with action. And we are at a point in time where we are at this intersection where if you go right, red pill, blue pill kind of moment, right? You actually have some prosperity. You go left, you go down the tubes. And as we sit at this T-junction, we actually have to look at ourselves and say, what is the creation that we want to have of this South Africa, which is bold, which is actually going out there and say we're going to be fearless in chasing what is right and what is equitable. And for me, that's important. Equitable society is what we should be actually building towards, where everyone feels included and there is room for inclusion. So that for me is what bold leadership is about.
To me, we're in bold leadership.
I think bold leadership really centers around being accountable and standing up to be counted. I think in as much as it may well be or seen as a government task, it requires each of us. And it says that let's critique, but also come up with solutions and do so boldly, and also saying I'm available to be part of the solution. So I think that's what, for me, I would characterize bold leadership as.
Mpumi, we're building to the perfect definition for bold leadership. Add your voice.
And I think Kuseni, Yolanda, and Tumi have actually touched on it. So for me, it is about understanding what are the challenges that we have as a country, but not being bystanders, because leaders need to stand up and be counted. So we need to form part of the solution, and we all need to gather around and pull together in one direction. So whether you are talking about government, business, civil society, labor, etc., we are at a crossroad. We do need to come up with solutions. And to Yolanda's point, it's then about execution, because execution is what will unfortunately or fortunately move the dial. Talk is okay, but action is what makes the difference.
Tembeka?
I suppose I agree with everything that's been said. So I know you qualify leadership with bold. So it's not leadership in a vacuum, but it's the bold part that probably matters. So it's about an idea. Leadership is you always need an idea. What are you trying to do? And South Africa itself was an idea first. Before these white people brought it together in 1910. But it was an idea, And in 1948, they too had an idea. It was a perverse idea of dividing it into racial segments, but it was an idea. And Nelson Mandela was driven by an idea, And so the thing is to always have an idea. And I fear that sometimes there's just no idea. You have no idea what are they trying to do, So today they say that they want to establish a second state-owned electricity monopoly after they collapsed the first one. So it's really getting an idea, right? So what has been the idea that has driven South Africa since the ANC became the government? The ANC is actually the boldest of all political formations across Africa and across South Africa, because it came with an idea that was unknown and that was criminal, the idea of non-racialism. And that's the idea that's kept South Africa together. But it couldn't sustain non-racialism without non-sexism, and it came with non-sexism. And it also couldn't sustain non-sexism without prosperity. It came with those three ideas. That these are the ideas that constitute South Africa. So what is the idea now? So I would suppose it's the three ideas, but they have to be taken into fruition. Non-racialism is probably no longer enough. What we need is to end racism. And non-sexism is also no longer enough. What we need is to end patriarchy. And prosperity is no longer enough. What we need is to end inequality. So again, it's combining the idea of ending inequality, ending white racism, which is the problem we have in South Africa, and ending patriarchy.
Very definitive. And I think that's a great way. I need a round of applause there. In terms of segueing into our next discussion, which is orientated to the youth. Nelson Mandela famously said that passion produces perseverance. How on earth are we going to create passion amongst the young people in South Africa so that they persevere, that they can persevere, Kuseni?
So I think we almost have to start a movement around #the youth matters. And then working from there, we have to deploy all the resources that are required from the private sector, from the public sector, from civil society, to really prioritize developing our young people. Countries such as Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan They don't have the mineral resources that we have and the iron ore that Mpumi mines. They do not have the arable land. Singapore has got no arable land at all. Everything you eat there is imported from outside. What they do have are their young people and the professionals that they've invested in. And I think we need to be very deliberate and intentional in really investing in maximizing the quality and quantity of our human capital in general, but in particular, investing in our young people. If you go across Africa, you see a very youthful population. There is a demographic transition happening globally. In the first world countries, such as Japan and other parts of Eastern Europe, you're seeing an aging population. You're actually seeing a deceleration in birth rates, and you're seeing increasingly a trend towards shortage of labor in some of those countries. Here in South Africa and elsewhere in Africa, we are having a youthful population that is, as we said earlier on, unemployed, and we're having an unemployment crisis. So it's only by being single-minded and deliberate in investing in our young people that we can be able to turn them into assets, to turn them into the entrepreneurs that should create jobs, turn them into the knowledge workers of today and the future, invest in them so that they are future fit and future perfect for the digital economies of our time and the digital backlinks of the current and future times.
So talking about turning words into action, which is my own hobby horse at the moment, I celebrate you, Yolanda Kuba. I think that what you have started with the Mentorship Boardroom, which you founded in 2012, correct?
No, this one in last year.
Last year, but ultimately it
Yeah.
started previously.
My mentorship circle.
Exactly,
yes.
because this is about action. This is about taking young people. The last hour that I've just spent with Zama was amazing. It made me feel that we are doing the right thing. So you are mobilizing. Now we need to get mass traction behind what you are doing, because this is a movement that can change the world. It can change South Africa.
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing for me that we need to do is actually say, not only say that there is a problem, right? Is to say, what can I do? How do I own the problem? And then say, what can I do sitting where I am with what I have, right? And basically, that's how the Mentorship Boardroom actually started, by saying, I want to start where I am with what I have. And basically, if we all actually start on that, I mean, Tembeka, Elia, and I were talking about the Ribonia Circle, right? A movement that Songeza actually has started as well. And for me, it's really around how do we create synergistic kind of relationships between these things such that we really have a groundswell of saying where we are is not okay. I think there are people that sit in ivory towers and look down and say, actually, it's okay. It's not that bad, right? And yet Rome is burning, and no one is accepting that Rome is burning. You cannot have 60+% unemployment of your youth and not think that is a burning platform. I mean, I remember about, when was it? Was it 3 years ago or 4 years ago? The US unemployment rate was 8.25 or something like that. It was a crisis. It was a crisis. You know, I mean, every radio station, every TV channel, everything was carrying this crisis. Here, you cross 30%, 40%. It's as if nothing is happening. So it's almost like what is said in numbers, in sort of statistics and so on, doesn't actually translate on to everyone around what is the real impact. When we have more than 50% of our entire population actually living below the breadline, right? What does that mean? And then what can we do individually in our little spaces to actually start something, spark something, make a change? And that's really where my mindset is at, is saying we are the people that definitely we have been waiting for. We are that generation.
So perhaps just to pick up on the stats that you referred to, and Tembeka and myself were chatting earlier about the fact that South Africa has always been in an anxious state. I mean, how many discussions we've had on news desks where we are about to go over the precipice. But actually, with 65% unemployment of our young people, we've gone over the precipice. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that, I mean, I was talking about this idea of South Africa as a concept. And it's always been anxious. It's always been, the explosion is happening. And you can take this back from the days of Van Riebeeck. When Van Riebeeck left this country, he left this note to the few Dutch people that were in the Cape and said, listen, you've treated these black people so badly. At a certain point in time, they will rebel against you. So arm yourselves, and then he went to Jakarta. So this idea, that an explosion is happening is 400 years old. Didn't emerge yesterday. So we are still living with that idea, of sort of constantly being on the edge, But what changes is the nature of the edge. Right now, we've got a class problem. We've got a real class problem. There are too many poor people. Too many poor people. No country can afford to have this many poor people. And these poor people are not going to vanish. They are our problem. And so this is the new struggle. It's the struggle to end this classism and the inequality. Now, and Yolanda's point is perfect, which is this: no one is solving it for us. We must solve it ourselves. Not for ourselves, but we must solve it for everyone else. So if you have an economy that benefits the few and doesn't benefit all, an explosion is inevitable. And if you have a constitution that benefits the few and doesn't benefit all, it loses legitimacy. So this is why it's crucial to talk about how do we end inequality. This is the urgency of 2022.
Hashtag country duty to me. You're about creating groundswells. So tell me how you're going to give this momentum now. We're making a difference.
Yes, again, it's really about standing up and be counted. I think, with hashtag country duty, with most people who would know, when things were going south during the former president's days, we were able to stand up and be counted. We ought to do the same now with the trajectory that's happening with the current leadership. Again, it goes through us as the youth, amongst other things. I think, to a point that was made regarding hashtag, it needs to now move to a real action over and above hashtag, right? So social media is a certain fraction of it. It's not reality per se. There's a certain fraction of it. There's a few aspects, but on the ground, it's just really a matter of time, as Temeka has said, that it's going to be me trying to go to work and being stopped and become, a victim of crime because the people are hungry. And it's about time that we stop having dialogues and start acting. And it starts with where, I think there was a point made regarding, age and how youthful things are. We have elderly people leading us as a country. There's no succession plan. And that, for me, poses a danger and ought to keep us awake as the young people of this country.
Mpumi, closing that gap that perhaps Yolanda alluded to earlier in terms of people sitting in the ivory tower looking down on the masses and saying, well, this isn't our problem. We're not really reading into those statistics much more because our lives are fine. How do we do that? Because we've got to get business to, and again, I'm a huge proponent of conversations year after year, decade after decade, I hate to say it now, but it's about this, turning words into action, execution. And yet we still aren't doing that from a business perspective. We're not closing that gap and understanding what business needs to do. It's not all about government. Business itself needs to do something to change the status quo.
Yeah, so it's a good one. And I think everyone has touched a little bit on this. So if I look at what we did during COVID, there's a couple of things that we need to read and utilize from that period. With COVID, there were no questions around whether COVID was here or not. There were not questions whether or not people were dying or not. We were all reading from the same script, and that was the figures that we were seeing. And all of us were panicking because we understood where we were heading. And it wasn't just about government or business or civil society. It was about all of us as a country. Have a look at what we then did. We were all able to mobilize, irrespective of who was there, raised a lot of money, and the fight was against the common enemy, which was COVID. I actually think we need to take from that and replicate that as we look at the challenges that we have right now, because I'm 100% aligned with you. It's not about government or business or whoever else it is. It is about our country. Some of us have got one passport. It's a South African passport. And we are serious about turning this around. And that's where business is, actually, if you look at what Business for South Africa is trying to do right now. And it's been around engaging with government, around aligning on a social compact, where all of us will have a look together on the challenges that we need to fight. And Kuseni touched on it. We do have an energy crisis. We do have a water crisis. We do have an unemployment crisis, and. And it's about saying, what can we do together? I think for me, the biggest thing is all of us need to read from the same dashboard, and all of us need to understand that we all need to work in one direction. And it's not about finger pointing, because all of us can finger point. It's easy to do that. But converting that into action is the difficult part. And that's where I take it back to what you mentioned around bold leadership. That's bold leadership, when you then do something about it. Because you touched on it, young people, are right to feel the way they feel right now. I spoke to Dimpo earlier, and thank you, Dimpo. It wasn't just about mentorship to Dimpo, it was about mentorship to me as well, about understanding the plight of young people. And we all need to do something about it.
So,
May I just come in on that?
Yes,
Just
you can.
2 points that are triggered by what Mpumi is saying, that we have to read from the same hymn book. 2.1, do we all here have a sense of what's the South African national interest? Because that has to be the departure point for us to be able to sing from the same hymn book and for us to align around it. The second point, do we know what
wait. Kuseni, unpack
national
that.
vision
Wait.
is?
First of all, unpack number one for me a little bit more, because I'm lost. Just explain to me number one again.
So the concept of national interest becomes a rallying point for all citizens, regardless of their political party affiliation, their gender, their race, or whatever their ideology. It's the things that unites all of us, that makes us South Africans, that we can differ on everything else, but we coalesce around that. And successful countries around the world have got a clear sense of what that is, and it's well articulated. It's actually replicated in the schooling system, and business people and politicians and trade unionists and all sorts of role players have a common and shared understanding of that. And I think we need that in South Africa. The second point is around the national vision. Leaders that are bold, back to the point of leadership, they tend to be vision-led and values-driven. And we need to have a sense of what our national vision is. We need to be able to articulate it. 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds must be able to articulate it. If you go to China, speak to Chinese kids, Japanese kids, they'll have a sense of what that is. And you go to the European countries, even the USA, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats in power, there is massive continuity in terms of issues such as foreign policy, economic policy, trade relations with China, approach to Russia. And I think that's also something that is important as we deliberate on the South Africa we want. We need to have the foundational, building blocks in place for us to be able to do that.
But if we don't execute quickly, we don't have a South Africa left. That's the reality.
Absolutely.
So, Tembeka, if I make you president right now,
Yes.
okay.
Guys, you've heard.
Right now,
Let me start with the cabinet.
Your Excellency.
Problem solved.
Definitely.
So, Your Excellency, you create for us now the perfect blueprint for bold leadership. You are defining the framework. You're going to have to keep it really short and tight because we have limited time. So,
No, I think I come back to where I started. There are three main ideas. These are ANC ideas. They have been badly managed. We must end inequality.
okay, but wait, okay. I want you to tell me how we're going to do this. You're president now.
Yes.
You can change the world.
Well, if we are to end inequality, firstly, we must break down the monopolies. There is too much concentration it's blocking progress and it's blocking growth. Secondly, we must create proper education. Black education is broken. And I don't know if people don't realize this. Black education is broken. The government has spectacularly mismanaged it. What it did successfully in the first 10 years was universal access. But it's failed now, even on universal access. Too many children are out of school. The third thing, if we are to end inequality, is redistribution. We have an unsustainable situation in which wealth, and we must repeat this, wealth in the form of land is sitting in the hands of the few. There is no economy that can be sustained if the wealth is not redistributed. The ANC began its vision in 1994 on redistribution. It soon abandoned redistribution when it adopted policies like GIA, and then it was ASGISA, and then no one knows what it is pursuing right now. But the fact of the matter is that if we don't confront the problem of concentration for the purposes of redistribution, we are actually going nowhere. The last thing is, I hear this point about working together, etc. I never understand what it actually means, because the interests are in conflict, fundamentally in conflict, because there is an interest of primitive capital accumulation, which is driven by the capitalist class, which is constantly in conflict with the wider public interest. Now, we don't confront that problem, and we keep on telling ourselves that somehow, miraculously, big businesses whose primary motive is profits will somehow find it somewhere in themselves that actually they must abandon the profit motive in order for a wider social interest, in circumstances where the primary catalyst for change is broken, which is the government. So you cannot have redistribution if you have a broken government. We have had a broken government for the last 15 years. We've got to strengthen the state. There is no country that makes social and economic progress with a broken state. Our state is broken, and the reason why it was broken is because the party is broken. So those are my 5 items if you vote for me.
Kuseni Dlamini, you are Minister of Finance. You now have been given the 5-plan objective from Tembeka.
Yes, I hear Mr. President speaking. We might have to have a robust discussion about economic policy.
Please don't fire the Finance Minister.
I'll question the President on the idea of breaking down monopolies. I'll turn around and say the problem is not monopolies in South Africa, but it's really the need for us to scale up our businesses so that they are global giants. If you look at the South African corporate sector, it does appear to be big in local terms, but in global terms, it's actually a midget. You pick any industry, you look at the Fortune 100, you look at the FTSE 100, how many South African companies will make that league? Mr. President, we need to create a conducive environment to make sure that we build a formidable corporate sector that can take the world on, globalize its footprint. I chair the board of ASPEN. We're in 50 countries in the world. We lead us in anesthetics outside of the United States. That's an example of a company founded in a 4-bedroom house in Durban that is globalized. Salome and I were speaking about that earlier on as well. So whether you take our banking sector, our telcos, our mining houses, on their own, with a few exceptions, we need to build a formidable, globally competitive, scalable private sector that will provide the solutions to the unemployment problems, to end inequality.
So you're saying economic growth.
Poverty.
Economic growth is what is going to spur. Mr. President, are you keeping your finance minister?
No, he wants to build bigger monopolies. Let's just know why I'm keeping him.
I think we have to defer to Madam Vice President.
Yes.
Madam Vice President.
Vice President, okay. I think, what the President has actually articulated well from my part is the part around education. You cannot build the future actually undermining yourself about your own kind of education system and the foundation that you need to build. Every country that has made a success of itself has actually started with that in mind. And at this stage, the education that our children are getting is called gutter education. It is good for the bin. When someone tells your child that you can pass with 30%, right? When someone tells your child that actually you're going to do maths literacy, that does not allow you to get into any course in university, is okay. We are deliberately lowering the standards for the future. So let us not pretend like we are not creating the future that we are living today. We agreed when people said, let's introduce OBE. We agreed when people said, no, let's change it and put something else. We were there. We didn't write any papers, right? We were there. We didn't write any papers. We didn't say anything. We didn't sign any petitions, right? And today we are living the consequences of the decisions we refuse to make. And today the challenge to everyone is, what are the decisions that we are willing to make? Because the ones that we refuse to make have already been made for us. Guys, our education system is broken. It is broken. And it is time we go back with the same allocation of money. By the way, in this country, Mr. President, the one thing that we do is we take housing and education, taking the majority share. We have teachers that say, at 12, I'm going home. There are teachers that say, I'm giving up on these children. There's no teacher that gave up on me. Yeah. And we have to change that culture. And by the way, I'm not saying we must do away with unions before we actually start that issue. However, what I am saying is that we cannot have unions protecting incompetence. We cannot have unions protecting what they're protecting today.
And I think this is what we can drive to now. So, Mr. President, with your permission, I'm going to hone in only on this education element, because we can't solve all the problems, but we can really make a difference where it's already started today, Yolanda. It started with everything you've done around the Mentorship Boardroom. This is education. This is giving back. You know, if we borrow from Nelson Mandela, his very famous statement, among many others, is that education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. I paraphrase. So we're going to make you Minister of Education to me. Right. This is all about education now, because we can. We can actually define a couple of things that we can change about education, we can take forward as this panel, as this forum, and advocate for tomorrow, where each of us can make a change. Minister of Education, sir.
Again, to your point about unions, I totally agree. I think there's a misalignment where unions are political in nature, right? So in these type of situations, you really need an apolitical type of union, which says it's about the kids of this country. It's about the country, it's about the national vision, and this is what it means to get there. And once we really not do away with them, but rather realign them for them to see that vision, we really stand a good chance. We need to be going to universities and not have as many of unemployed teachers, unemployed doctors in a country with a high unemployment rate and inequality as we are, and we still have to go on social media and ask people to donate towards doctors or unemployed teachers. It's not sustainable. And therefore, again, to the point that I had made, the elders that are leading us are actually failing us, and we really need a change. And it starts with us right here and post these discussions and taking it forward.
It starts with you, Minister.
Absolutely.
So what is your decree?
It's as simple as that. With the powers vested in the president, with the budget from the Minister of Finance, we do what we can to change it and make sure that we invest. And we are in a situation where, for example, in the Eastern Cape, with such a really terrible state of education, it does not make sense every year that certain amounts are returned back to Treasury. We need to do better. Fire them all, start again, and make sure that we have the competent people there. And that's really what needs to happen.
You are governor of the Reserve Bank. Mpumi.
Yep.
You've got the purse strings. you also can gather a business delegation and get them to ignite a campaign where in corporate social initiatives, education becomes the most important element within those CSI stances. Strategize for me here.
Fantastic. So I'm the governor of the Reserve Bank. And the first thing that I'd look at is the fact that, and I'd chat to my Minister of Finance, by the way, as well. I think the president is considering reinstating it. I think one thing that we need to recognize is that sometimes the challenge is not about money. It's about the lack of vision and the lack of having a plan. So as the governor of the Reserve Bank, I'd have a chat with my president, Madam Vice President, and the Minister of Education, and I would say, let's start with first things first. We need to review the education system, because in most cases, we want to start with money. But having money without having a plan is a big problem, because what are you actually going to fund? So I would say, let's work on a plan first, review the education system, come up with a feasible plan. I would not fire all the teachers, etc., by the way. I would invest in them. I would engage with the unions as well. And the one thing that UTATA stood for was the aspect of saying, forget about the fact that you've got different political parties, and forget about the things that divide us. But let's all look at having one vision and all being aligned to what it is that we are trying to solve. So I would gather, actually I can't gather as the governor, hey? But I would force us
be very
to
careful.
say,
You are
before we
striking
talk about
narrow.
money, let's talk about having a plan. And I would say, once we have a feasible plan, we'll find the money. There's big corporate, and the Minister of Finance, who's been reinstated, has already said it. Guys, corporate companies want to fund. I think the mistake that we make is we think that corporate companies don't want things that are in the best interest of the country. I look at the company that I work for, and our purpose is to reimagine mining to improve people's lives. And the key is improve people's lives. You can't improve people's lives if you don't start with the youth of the country and if you don't start with our kids. So I would say, as the governor, let's have a plan. If we have a plan, we will find the funds, and big corporate will actually come in, because big corporate doesn't want to see our country failing.
Now, let's go back to what Mr. Dlamini said. And you said, let's unify around a national interest. Could we have just found our national interest around which to unify? Our children, Mr. President?
Look, I mean, I agree with this idea of focusing on children and giving them proper education. And I mean, again, it's not a new idea. This is an old idea. You know, when the British arrived in this country, they set up all of these missionary schools. You know, actually, even the Dutch East India Company had a school of some sort, because they needed to teach the children the Dutch language and to teach them the values and the morals of the Dutch Reformed Church. So education is more than 400 years old in this country. Even the ANC actually always had this idea that we want universal access to education. So where has the problem been? When I go to my own village, because I went to a mission school, a Methodist school, when I go to my own village, and these were all taken over by the apartheid government, and they were then messed up by the whites under the apartheid government, but by the white government, not all the whites. So what happened? What went wrong? When I go to my village now, I'll give you 3 things that are absolutely fundamentally wrong. There are too many children not in school. And that number has been made worse by COVID. 30-40% of dropout rates. Number 2, what the children are learning in class is not worth the paper it's written on. They can't speak English, which is what they go there to speak. They also can't speak their own languages, nor can they write them. They cannot count. So if you can't read, and you cannot write, and you cannot count, what are you studying?
So Mr. President, you're not answering my question.
Okay, please.
You are adding to what the Madam Vice President said with regards to education being in the gutter. This is the same thing we're hearing from you. I asked you whether you would be happy if we could say, let's unite around a national interest that puts children at the center of South Africa.
Oh, yes, the answer to that is yes.
Thank you for answering my question,
Yes,
sir.
yes, yes.
Right. We're now going to open up to the audience.
Sorry,
And-
Bronwyn,
Yes.
before you open up to the floor, one thing though that we mustn't forget is that this education doesn't happen in a vacuum, because today the other burning platform is inequality and poverty. Too many people are going to sleep without food in their tummy. We cannot sustain that, right? I mean, as I said, more than 50% of our population is living below the poverty line. We can't do that. That's 1,300, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that, right, per household. And for me, that is the travesty that we're actually living in, is that actually these are the two things that are our real burning platforms. Today, when Eskom decides to switch off power, sends me the SMS, you know, that HCOM thing, your power is going to be off in 55 minutes, right? Double check, is there enough diesel in the generator? Yes. My life continues, right? My life continues, right? But just across the bridge, it is pure darkness. My kids are learning. The kids across the bridge are not learning. The kids that are getting left behind, the families that are getting left behind, are the ones that are on the other side of the bridge. That inequality, with our Gini coefficient just pretty much being the worst in the world, keeps on getting bigger, right? And this is not a capitalist issue. This is something that has been created because of bad decisions. This is not white capital, Tondoni, and black capital, Tondoni. It's not that at all. It is actually bad decisions.
So, and given, I mean, all the global talk on global stages and within or across the African continent, rather, is about the looming global food crisis. So the situation is only going to become worse.
Absolutely.
Madam Vice President, and I'm not making light of the situation here, but I am saying we're driving to an agenda which we're going to close out on. You're challenging now, and I'm taking this as a challenge.
Yeah.
We don't close out on one national interest here on education. Are you going to overturn the president?
We're saying we'll get
We go to national
Yeah,
interest.
because the other one starts at the bottom. The other one must start today.
No, I think I've got three ideas, and these are not mine, these are ANC's ideas. I want to end inequality.
Yes.
I want to end racism, white racism, and I want to end patriarchy. I cannot achieve any of this if I have an undereducated population.
Absolutely.
And that is why I want to put education at the center in order to end white racism, to end patriarchy, and to end inequality.
Do you agree?
100%. 100%.
So,
Cabinet.
and that's probably the shortest cabinet meeting in the history of South Africa. Right. So we open up now to the audience. Yes. I think we have a roving mic there. I would like you to observe this protocol. When you have the mic, I'd like you to stand up, to state your name, where you're from, and then to address your question to the respective panelists.
All right.
It's working.
All right. Thank you so much. My name is Dominic Kumalo, and the first observation is to the cabinet itself. But I do not think that the issue is the plan. The vision is there. If you look at a 489 document that was written, led by Trevor Manuel, the National Development Plan, it articulates everything. It diagnoses the problem of the country. The problem of where we are now is the lack of bold leadership. And I can't say who should lead or shouldn't. Perhaps, you know, Mr. President and your cabinet, it could start there. And I'm not saying this lightly. Something could come out of this panel. But the question goes directly to the president, Advocate Ngwaitogi.
Bronwyn, you started this.
Well, nobody can say I didn't create change when you wake up tomorrow and there are news headlines with a new president in there. This is what I want to do in my life.
Mr. President, we live in a constitutional democracy where, unfortunately, the elected and representative entities of the state vis-a-vis the legislature and the executives are seemingly unable to exercise their constitutional responsibility. That is a given fact. As a consequence, the courts are now called upon to intervene even in spaces where they do not have competency. And they're starting to execute the very responsibility that your cabinet and the legislative arm is supposed to execute. Do you think South Africa is moving away from a democracy towards a juristocracy? And as such, should the judiciary exercise judicial deference in certain spaces of society before it starts losing legitimacy in itself? Because for me, the judiciary is the only entity now that has legitimacy in the eyes of South Africans. But that could also be a danger towards a constitutional democracy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Yes, firstly, if the politicians, if we sitting here as this cabinet are not doing our job, in the next election, we must all be voted out. And it is not true that there are no alternatives to us. There are many alternatives to us. They are always on the ballot paper. The last one had 46. But you have constantly chosen us, despite our failures. And you have yourselves to blame. So,
Ouch, ouch, ouch.
Exactly that.
and number two, the judiciary has been doing its role. Sometimes perfectly, sometimes very good. And what have these areas been that would justify the label of a juristocracy? One has been an involvement in what we can call political disputes, sometimes policy disputes. But the reason they have done that is because the Constitution says they're entitled to do it. But in cases where, like preparation of legislation, etc., they've always pulled back. In cases of implementation of policy, they've always pulled back. So they've kept the delicate balance between what the politicians do and what the judges do. The problem is that the politicians don't like being told that they've acted unconstitutionally. And in a constitutional democracy, it's the job of the judges to tell the politicians that they've acted unconstitutionally. So what they do, they ratchet up the rhetoric. Look, the judges are taking over political power. But it's all bogus. The judges have not taken any political power. They've simply decided what the law is. And often, when a person has broken the law, you know what the consequences are. They include going to jail for contempt. There's nothing wrong with that. When the person comes out of jail, they will say that judges are taking over. They are entering into a political space. But the mere fact that the judges are sending a politician to jail doesn't mean that the judges are performing a political function, because they will send you and me like everybody else. Because why? Section 9 of the Constitution says everyone is equal before the eyes of the law. And that does not change simply because the person who's an accused number one is a politician. So I don't think that there is any justification for the accusation of a juristocracy. The real problem has been the fact that the state is broken. And this is a political question, not a legal question. And this is what we are failing to address. And that is why someone like Songezo, I actually take my hat off him, because he has told everyone on television that he wants to be president. That is what we need. We don't need someone who is, I don't know how old Songezo is, maybe he's 45 or whatever. But we need someone who's 18 to also say, I want to be president. Someone who is 21 to say, I also want to be president. Why not? In France, a 35-year-old can be president. David Cameron, how old was he? 37 or something when he became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. You know, Barack Obama was in his late 40s when he became president of the biggest democracy in the world. So that is what we need. We need to break this idea that leadership belongs to the ANC leadership, so that leadership is something diffuse and anyone can stand and say, so what can you do now?
Or that leadership belongs to elderly statesmen.
Yes. What we can do now on the issue of leadership, there is a bill in Parliament, and I promise you this is the last point I'm going to make. There's a bill in Parliament now, right now as we speak, which is about introducing independence to run into office. I ask you, how many of you have made submissions to that bill? How many? 0. This is the problem. Civil society does not work if the society itself doesn't work. So put the pressure, because there is no reason why the ANC should, in a sense, put a bill that will take it out of power. So if you want to see real political changes, go to Parliament, make submissions on the bill that is intended to put independence in political office.
Now, we have about 15 minutes, about 10 minutes left. I'm going to take another 4 questions from the audience, but what I do want for those questions to be directed to Kuseni, to Yolanda, to Tumi, and to Mpumi. So, have I got a taker? Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Just hold it like this.
Hi, everyone. Oh, okay. My name is Promise. I'm from Malamleli. So actually, I think I'd like to ask you, Yolanda. So during COVID, right, we saw the president consulting a lot, right? It seemed like every little decision was, I want to consult, I want to get businessmen, I want to get like, everyone was being asked, right? And as aspiring leaders, leaders, is it beneficial to ask everyone before you make a decision? Does that make a bold leader? Oh, sorry, and another thing, guys, let's go and vote. Like, that is where the change starts. Yes. Let's go and vote. Yeah. So even if we don't do anything now, but go and vote.
Yeah, absolutely. Good.
Yolanda?
Yeah, okay. I mean, bold leadership first starts with the word leadership, right? Before the bold starts. And leadership says you actually have to take decisions from an informed position. Informed position, you actually have to first then accept that you are not you don't hold the monopoly on all education, right? On all knowledge, right? So you do consult. How wide you consult is based on your own ability to assimilate what you need to assimilate to make that particular decision. And boldness actually talks for me to action. Once I have made the decision, once we have collectively said, maybe this is the direction and this is where we need to go to, right? Then it is that execution. The other day, who was I talking to? Was I talking to you, Kuseni, about a document that I found from, is it ECD? What is that?
CDE.
Yeah, CDE, right? I was packing boxes away. This document comes from 2008, December, written by the CDE, right? And it talks about the electricity crisis in South Africa. At MTN now, if someone said to me, we will not provide connectivity to you guys, we'll load shed connectivity, right? You guys will be up in arms. You know, and yet we accept to be load shedded 20 times over when it started in 2008. CDE actually had documents. So, and it made proposals after consulting widely, including unions, including this, including that, right? And it wrote, I think there were 7 or 8 points that actually they had written there as recommendations. By the way, those recommendations do not change much from today. The first thing that I heard in the last few days is just this creation, Mr. President, of this new monopoly. But, you know, but other than that, the ideas are exactly the same. We should have executed in 2008. We shouldn't be sitting here in 2022. Our lack of impatience with the government is our fault.
Yeah.
We have to be more impatient in holding those in power accountable. The people here shouldn't be sitting here if they are not performing. We are the first ones to say, Mr. Director, you must step down. But we're not the first one to say the policymakers must step down. Because they are the ones that are delaying progress, right? So we must call a spade a spade. We must be intellectually honest. When I do something wrong at MTN, you call for my resignation the following day. But we are not able to do so when it comes to public office. So we must actually have the intellectual honesty to be able to do the right thing.
And that is bold leadership. To you? There's a mic just behind you.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Mandela Kumalo. I'm the CEO of Ebain Living and Ebain Social Housing. So we provide quality, affordable housing solutions in major cities of South Africa. So my question is around, I won't call it exclusion, but I'd call it barriers to entry. So we've experienced that quite a lot in the space, trying to break into, so we already own a portfolio of student accommodation, but to get into that mainstream proper development has been more of a headache. You run up and down looking for equity, the financing, the backing that you can get. So it doesn't matter how competent you are. So I'm a civil engineer, so I know my space. I've worked at big companies and so on, and I've displayed my competence in there, and that was sufficient. But when I'm not doing it by myself, with my team, that are equally competent professionals at that, registered with whatever institutions, you don't have the expertise. So the banks that are funding the major guys don't fund us, they don't look at us. So how do we work around that space? How do we break that barrier that we're currently experiencing right now? And I'm sure a lot of other people that are in the space
So you're going to
that.
have to define the question for which panelist?
So I'm not sure if it's a finance issue, because there's also a policy in the process. So it's a cabinet question. Right? So, it's a cabinet question. But yeah, maybe the finance minister can answer.
Finance.
Yeah, thanks.
So I would say as government, we've got a number of institutions that are designed to help you deal with that issue, such as the IDC, the NEF, we've got the PIC also, and CEDA as well. And I'll suggest that you go and contact those institutions. But if you have a problem, if you have a problem, please do come back to me as finance minister. I will make sure that I reach out. But on a serious note, I think the problem you're highlighting is huge. It's a big elephant in the room. We talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about growing businesses, but there is lack of funding out there. Not because the capital is not there. There is just no risk appetite. We've got a culture of risk aversion. We're not like markets like the US where you have an active and entrenched culture of venture capital and funders are willing to take risk. I think that's something that also needs to be challenged and needs to be changed. We need to democratize access to finance in this market, and that's dragging us back. Because if you were to execute on all those projects that you have, it will help us deal with the unemployment issue that we're dealing with. It will help us deal with the education issue. You're focusing on a very important sector. In my other role, I'm chairman of University of Pretoria Council. Accommodation at universities, it's a big challenge. So you're solving a problem that is real, that's practical, that is there. So you deserve all the support that you need to be able to do that. We have a CEO of a listed property company here, Liberty 2 Degrees. Amelia, she knows that space. She may provide some ideas. You may want to reach out to her. Maybe she's got something to say on that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Pindan Jogweni from Jogweni Attorneys. Let's call it what it is. The ANC government has failed us, continues to do so. The only way out of this quagmire is to outvote these people. It's as simple as that. And it's not going to be the current leadership or whoever. It is our time. We must raise and stand up and outvote these people. Because they are corrupt, the resources are there, they are squandering them. It is what it is. It's corrupt, they've failed to govern, it is what it is. It's only us and the youth that must stand up and outvote them. I mean, where I come from in Queenstown, there was a stadium that was built allegedly for, 26 million. And when I drove past that stadium, in inverted commas, the grandstand was something bought from some Amazon or something, costing a mere 600,000 rand. The very next month, when local elections, the residents voted for the same people. So the problem is not the state, it's us. If we don't take decisive decision and outvote these people, I mean, we've got no reason to cry.
To me, you come in here. We're still going back to that groundswell that you can create.
I think the issue of voter education is also quite important. And it's something that, the responsibility relies on all of us. The gogos at home, malume, that you actually do have power to outvote the ANC, you know, in as much as they were crucial in obtaining or really rallying the ground towards your freedom. But this cannot be sustained. It's not sustainable. You see it on social media. Sometimes someone says, it's election time, I need to hide my Gogo's ID or otherwise. But that defeats the purpose, right? They need to accompany Gogo. You need to go home and say, this is what the ballot looks like. 1, 2, 3. Just put an X, as long as it's not 1. And that's the power I think we can do, because ultimately you need to provide practical solutions, and not voting, it doesn't help. So we really need not only, I mean, one of the things, I mean, the IEC is not here, but again, I would want to see the IEC doing voter education. There's a budget for it. They need to be coming in, not being political, but saying, this is what we do, this is the mandate, this is why it's important from a constitution perspective, and you as citizens have power. I need to hear that ad on radio, on Power FM, for example, must pay given and say, let us then do our part and educate people. It's as simple as that. So there's that opportunity. So let's also do our part as people as well.
Yep, question at the room.
Oh, this side?
Go ahead. For Mpumi, huh? Go ahead here, Mpumi.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me properly? Yes. So I'm Sanili Sibia. I am an attorney in the commercial property finance space at the moment. My question is aimed at Evo and to Yolanda. Just on the education topic. I was just thinking, it's not so much of a question, but just challenging you guys, the panel, and everyone that's here tonight on maybe do we not need to look at what is relevant that we need to train our graduates, our students in today's society. There is a change in the types of curriculums that we need to be putting out and actually teaching to high school students, to university students, introducing new sets of degrees, new sets of modules that will actually set them up to be competitive in the world of work today.
I'm reordering the cabinet quickly. Minister of Education, Mpumi.
Fantastic. Our answer is the Minister of Education. I'm very passionate about education. I agree with you. But I think when we look at education, we need to look across the board, because the challenge actually exists across the board. So if you look at the basic education space, just have a look at how many people actually start and how many finish. There's a problem. And with those who finish, Yolanda spoke about it, how many of those actually have good matric or grade 12 as it's called today? There's a problem that needs to be solved. And then you are talking about the step post-stat, which essentially says, how do we arm those who are either at university, technicons, etc., with, I guess, qualifications and skills that will make them employable? And that requires a lens that goes, what are the skills for the future? I mean, I look at it when I was, and clearly I'm the old generation. I'm an engineer. I learned a lot of things and went and did engineering. If I'm open and honest, most probably I've only used 30%, if at that, to help me with the different roles that I've had to play over time. So we don't want to repeat that. We want to say, how do we make that relevant, and how do we start bringing in those skills of the future? So Hosseini spoke about digitalization. It's critical because clearly that's something that's required for the future. So yes, there is that aspect. But I don't want us to lose the other two aspects as well, because not everyone should aspire to get employed. We need entrepreneurs, And we need to help people. And whether people then start their own, smaller businesses, it's okay. They will employ others. So we need to cater for that stream as well. We also need to cater for the trades, because those trades would still be there. So it doesn't matter. You can be in 2040. If you need a plumber, you need a plumber, ne?
Yeah.
And if you get, I don't know, whatever skill set, if it doesn't cater for the actual challenge that you have, there's a problem. So I think the key thing that we need to be mindful of from an education perspective is that there's not just one solution. We need to look a little bit broader, and that's what we need to cater for. Thank you.
Stefano?
Steph Marani, CEO of Renogen. And this is a question to the cabinet at large. I'm not going to hone in on anyone specifically. Even if we get to the point where we have this groundswell and we outvote the incumbent, even if we have bold, decisive leadership and we have these leaders that crawl out of the woodwork and they stand up and they capture the hearts and the minds and the imaginations of the country at large, even if we manage to achieve absolutely all of that and we find the money to do all of this, how, I ask you with tears in my eyes, are we going to achieve any of it when everyone is hamstrung by a legislative process which is so over-regulated and mired with red tape that it takes such an inordinately long amount of time to get an approval for someone to tie their bloody shoes? Even if you change the political party, nothing will happen for the next 25 years. So I sit here and I come to the conclusion that we are going to hit the wall even if we make the right decisions.
That's certainly not where I wanted to end the conversation. It's like gone, now we got to pick it up again and just bring back that bold leadership. Ensure Stefano that he will be able to tie his shoes without getting permission.
Yes.
Quickly, let's redeem ourselves here as the cabinet. Let's go around. Mr. President, starting with you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've heard this thing about the red tape and how overregulated we are, etc. And I've always thought, well, you haven't gone to England or haven't gone to America or whatever, and say that if we've got 10 laws regulating one area, they have 30 there, So I don't think the problem, usually we say the problem is the law. I don't think the problem is really in the law. And in the area where a lot of complaints have been about over-regulation, unfortunately, is it Stefan or Stefano? You didn't say exactly which area you are worried about. Are you worried with the regulations around tendering, regulations around employment, or precisely what regulations? But what I've heard, just because, I thought that was tongue-in-cheek because there is no law about tying your shoes, But what I have heard is a discussion about the over-regulation of employment. People say it's very difficult to fire a person in this country, blah, 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 blah. But the reality is that it's actually very simple to fire a person in this country if you just follow the correct process. And this is why many people who go to the CCMA don't actually win their cases. If you look at the statistics in the CCMA, employers have a higher win ratio versus employees. And then the same thing as in the labor court. So usually the problem is not with the law itself. The law is always intended to make us better people. And if you are going to put a law that ultimately is intended to favor big employers, etc., you're ultimately making all of us bad people. So the law is usually with this intention of trying to civilize all of us. And that is why I am very defensive of the legal system per se. The problem is the people that are meant to administer it. And the problem is that they don't understand the law. And sometimes they have double agendas. So it's really about that area of implementation. We had one only...
So, Mr. President, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to wrap. I've got to get 2 minutes across the rest of the
I was just going to make one example. One example that illustrates this problem. For the last 4 years, Stefano, 4 years of time, the ANC government has lied to this nation and has told us that the problem with the land reform is the law. They came back to the truth in October, that the law has nothing to do with their own failures. And I don't want to say I told them, but some of us from the get-go said, stuff the nonsense. The problem is not the law, the problem is you. 4 years later, they came back. But in that 4 years, think what we could have done to address the land problem.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mpumi.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think I get where you're coming from. So
I do just want to caveat that these are final comments.
Fantastic.
So bring it back to bold leadership as well, if you can.
Yeah. So I get where you're coming from, but I think there's a challenge that we have. Because if you think about it, the reason why some of the administrators of the law come up with lengthy processes is because they don't trust business to do the right thing. And I think we need to fix that aspect, and it's through a conversation that seeks to get a sense of why there's that trust deficit. Because I don't think it's always around the law. So I look at it, I've had the benefit of visiting different countries that mine. All of them want to know, what are you going to do to look after the environment? It's not a South African issue, it's a global issue. All of them want to know, what are you going to do to add value when it comes to society, especially communities that are closest to you. It's not about the law. All of them want to know, what are you going to do to actually employ local people and also drive transformation? It's across the board. So we need to ask ourselves the question, what has actually happened? Because there is a trust gap. We need to fix that in order to make the progress that we need to make for me going forward. So as business, I think we shouldn't just think that it's just about government. The people that are there most probably slow things down, and there are systems that can be improved. But I think there's a trust element that we need to ask ourselves around, and then all make sure that we are united around one vision, have a similar purpose. I think we would achieve significantly more if there was alignment.
Tumi, closing comment.
Yes, I think I totally agree with Mpumi. And I think from that trust deficit also comes an opportunity for capacity building as well. So business cannot stand on the side. They need to say, we appreciate that you may be struggling. This is how we think we could help, and do so collaboratively. So there's always that opportunity. And you know, it's different where you'd come in and try and dictate, for example. But if you come in and say, perhaps this is the problem, let's define it together, let us collaborate, this is how we can capacitate, for example, at Home Affairs, you know, and you know, you could deal with the system, capacitate and ensure that it's efficient. And that's how I think that trust deficit can always, you know, be pushed a little up, and there's opportunities there. So let's do our part, I think, as business as well.
Yolanda.
Yeah, I guess to bring it back to bold leadership, I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that there are problems in pockets of the system. And one of the problems is really around defining, what does success look like for everyone? Right now in South Africa, success for a white family, right, or a rich upper class black family, right, is very different to what it means for the majority. And that's where we need to start, to say, what is that common definition of success, right? I mean, for me, if success means I actually build higher walls, if success means I accumulate and now I can get a second passport, right, then that does not touch the majority of South Africans. And that's where we are. And I think that dialogue point that Kusenia raised right at the beginning on saying, actually, what is success for everyone? Is success ensuring that every child is fed, every child is able to count and actually is good at comprehension as a primary kind of key kind of enabler? Then let's start there and say, what does that mean? And then look back at ourselves and say, actually, how do we then create that future and take action, bold action, towards the direction that we want? Inclusion is an agenda item, and we cannot continue with the exclusionist kind of mentality that we have today. When we talk about Black people, in a lot of cases, we talk about Black people as if they are not in the majority of this country. In boardrooms, when we talk about Black executives, we're still talking about them as if they are not 90% plus of this country. We're actually saying, why don't we take a risk on Banban, as if they're not in the majority? We should be taking a risk on the minority, not on the majority. And these are the conversations that we need to put on the table and say, how can we drastically and with accelerated kind of urgency start making or taking bold little steps towards where we're trying to get to?
So, Cassini, we've done full circle to back where we started with that national interest. Yolanda's put it firmly back on the table in terms of eliminating poverty and inequality, and certainly upgrading or elevating education across the board for our children. Is that where we end with our bold leadership initiative?
I think so. And I think Stefano raised a very important question. And by the way, I agree with all what my colleagues have said. And want to add to that is that if we really get to a space where we've got board leadership, the leadership has to realize that regulations must be enablers of growth, enablers of job creation, enablers of poverty alleviation, and ending inequalities, as Tembeka said earlier on. And I think we need to be intentional as a cabinet, Mr. President, in really focusing on smart regulations, regulations that make it easier for business to operate while addressing the issues of transformation, inclusion, and empowerment of all citizens. Countries such as the UK have what they call regulatory impact assessments. After 12 months of passing a regulation, if the regulation is achieving what was intended and is enabling competitiveness, they keep it. If it doesn't enable and promote competitiveness, then they do away with it. I was at the Mining Indaba a few months ago. The president of Zambia at a lunch was saying to investors there, if you come to Zambia, there is red tape, there's a regulation that stands in the way. I commit to change it so that things can be expedited, Stefano. You can have the investment that you want, because he realizes that he's got a youth unemployment problem just like we do. And in order to solve that problem, you need to crowd in as much foreign capital as you can, and indeed local capital. Let's not forget the importance of domestic investment as well. So I think bold leadership, if it is really bold, has got to be able to deal with those issues and find lasting solutions.
And on that note, yes, Yolanda.
That I want to say around enabling environments. When COVID started, Rwanda in particular actually passed a lot of regulation relating to the ease of movement of cash, the ease of cashless environment and so on. Within like literally 6 months, we were like cash light, right? Everything was getting digitized, everything moved, right? And for me is that if there is the will at the top, they will find a way, we will all find a way to actually make it. And in fact, I've got a phrase for it. I say, there are countries that I go to, and I'm not going to mention which countries, where I get the red tape actually rolled out at us, right? And then there are countries where we go to, like Rwanda, for example, where you get the red carpet for investment being rolled out for us. And the difference between the two tells us who are going to be the champions in this league and who are going to be the laggards in this league.
I think that is a beautiful summation of our discussion. Thank you very much to Tembeka Mpumi, Tumi, Yolanda Kuseni. It's been an enlightening conversation. I herewith call the cabinet meeting adjourned.
Thank you. Wonderful.